just moved over 100% from working at A Star to my new company Moya. So it's a whole different challenge, right? Like it's freeing, but at the same time very scary as well. But I'm excited. I'm very, very excited.
Well, thank you. We're so delighted to have you, especially from your experience from the technical and also the government side, so that we
Exactly.
could share with our audience how it's actually connected as well. So, getting into the introduction, I guess. So, Singapore has submitted their NDC and also stated their ambition to reduce the greenhouse gas emissions earlier this year, which is
Yeah.
in February. So could you please share with us the updates on its NDC and the difference between the previous one?
Okay, so I guess like previously we talked about just peaking our emissions and it was like for 2030. But now what we are thinking about is a bit further, right? We're talking about 2035 and we are talking about reductions. So um officially our targets are that by 2035 you want to go down to 45 to 50 megatons of emissions per year. For context, in I think last year, in 2023 or 2024, our latest emissions numbers are close to 60 megatons. So basically, we're talking about by 2035, base compared to right now, it's at least, it's up to 25% reduction in emissions. That's a huge amount of reductions. So that's kind of like the major change. We're actually taking a huge step and committing that yes, we will reduce a significant amount of emissions in the next 10 years. And the difference from the past is that previously we were still looking at okay, just peaking and long term thinking about going down. But now like even in in the middle short term, we're actually making concrete um, commitments to reduce emissions. And that's a huge change from where we were in the past.
Yes, yes. I also realized that on its first NDC, on Singapore's first NDC documents, you use the peak term, and
Exactly.
then on the second document, you use the to reduce. So I just want
Exactly.
to know, like, does this mean that the Singapore government is giving the Singapore people to adapt first with their emissions, and then in 2030 and beyond, then you started to count like how many emissions can we reduce from this year to this year. So what can you say about that?
Okay, so I guess like the reason why we have become more ambitious or more confident to make such targets is previously we were looking at a lot of domestic measures and how much we can do within the country. You know, how the industry can change energy efficiencies, installing as much solar panels as we can, and that's what we were confident with, and that's what we were pushing for. And we at least knew that we wanted to peak. So that's already a reduction compared to business as usual because if you don't do anything it will actually will exponentially grow. So we at least said that hey, we want to at least peak because we know that's within our domestic control. But now given a couple of years, we have been aggressively pushing for international collaboration. So that's actually a huge key difference. So previously it was a lot of like domestic measures and we was just opening up and thinking about international collaboration, but now a lot more things are concrete. We do know that hey, if we work with other countries, we can do a lot more, and that's why the ambition that we have taken, like up to 25% reduction. If you think about what we can do internally, that's what if you cover the whole country with solar panels, we can get about 5 to 10% of our energy needs. That's it. Like, where's the rest of the energy going to come from? There's only that much you can do with energy efficiency. So, and if you think about it, 5-10% versus up to 25% reduction in emissions, that's like 5 times our domestic targets. The reason why we are making such a huge shift is because both internally and externally, we do have more sureties that we want to go for international collaboration. We know that once we do it, if we do it and when we do it, we can make a lot more emissions reductions. We can make those targets. So yeah.
Oh, that's an optimist statement that's coming from you, Anik.
Yes, yes. So that's kind of like why we are more confident enough to at least make those targets, right? Like that's
Yeah. And I see that on your the second NDC on the first page there is like this footnote written that the reduction target is contingent on technological maturity and also an effective international cooperation, just as you said earlier. So
Hmm.
I wonder how the Singaporean government defines an effective international cooperation in terms of climate, because it's so complex.
Okay, okay. So I guess yeah, you can talk about collaboration in so many different ways, like policy wise and so on and so forth. But the key thing is technology or like concrete collaboration. So there are three key ways that we want to push for collaboration. Number one is physically, which means there's a physical trade of green energy. So green electricity, if you're purchasing what do you call it, electricity produced from renewables from other country, or hydrogen or ammonia, so that's like physical trade of green energy. So we replace our current energy with green energy, right? Number two is sort of indirect collaboration, which means that we trade carbon credits or emissions. So using Article 6, where basically we say that instead of reducing emissions in Singapore, we can, with the same money, reduce a lot more emissions somewhere else, and actually have like win-win scenarios where the other country also benefits. So that's like number two. So number one is physical, we trade energy. Number two is kind of like virtual in a sense, right? So we trade carbon emissions or carbon credits. And number three is money. So green finance. We've actually already committed up to $500 million in concessionary finance with FastP. So this is the three big approaches that we're really pushing to make this happen. And that when we talk about like concrete international collaboration, this is what we mean. We mean that right now we're using energy. In the future, we want that energy to come from a sustainable source. It's going to be from another country, and it comes to Singapore, either as electricity or as hydrogen, ammonia, or some other kind of fuel. Number two, if we can't do that, the path towards there, right? In the intermediary, we're going to enhance climate change mitigation in other countries. So we're going to be like, hey, instead of trying to make the small amount of emissions reduction in Singapore, the same amount of money we can do a lot more in other countries. So that's kind of like number two. And finally, like with FastP, these things they're going to be projects to enable this, right? And we are putting in a huge amount of money in concessionary finance to make sure this happens. This actually moves. And in other countries as well, not just in Singapore, but also in ASEAN and stuff. So we are putting up pots of money to actually make this happen as well.
Well, great. That's great how you highlight like three priority
Mm.
or three main how to say three main actions or category that
Yeah.
could be like supporting you to create an efficient international cooperation. But what about the process, the team behind this climate regulation? How is the
Mm.
process of like climate policy making in Singapore? I've read like there are some institutions, government institutions like Interministerial Committee on Climate Change, National Climate Change Secretariat, where you
Mm.
worked at, and how does it cooperate with others?
Okay, so I guess in Singapore, climate change as an agenda actually fits under the Prime Minister's office. So a bit of context on how Singaporean government is structured. There are various different ministries, like the Ministry for Trade and Industry. There is a Ministry for Sustainability and the Environment, and so on and so forth. And these ministries have their own kind of like agenda or purpose for existence. But certain uh, problems or issues are actually cross-cutting. So they cut across multiple ministries. So instead of parking them in a specific ministry, those issues are actually parked under, or those agenda are parked under what's called the Prime Minister's office. And this Prime Minister's office kind of coordinates these issues. So issues including climate is parked under there. Population is parked under there. A lot of security issues are parked under there. Digitization, our research, National Research Foundation is parked under there. So there's a lot of like issues that go cut across ministries. So those are parked under the Prime Minister's office. So specifically for climate change, there is the National Climate Change Secretariat under the Prime Minister's office. So they are the ones that handle the coordination of all the national level climate efforts. So that's where we're coordinating all the ministries, so internally, and then also doing all the reporting and coordination at the international level. So they deal with Article 6 negotiations, where negotiations at the UNFCCC. So every year, when we go to COP, our negotiators are over there, right? That's where like a lot of the coordination is done. So that's one thing. The next thing is we also have this thing called the Interministerial Committee for Climate Change. So this is where we have the top level, both politician and civil servants. So we have both like a lot of ministers. This is chaired by our DPM, and there's various ministers sitting on this IMCCC, and at the same time, a lot of our um, head of civil servants, right? So various permanent secretaries and stuff, like really high level officials, sit over there, and they are chaired by the head of civil service. So they all come together. They all realize that this is something that is cutting across multiple ministries, and they do the coordination over there. The implementation of the so that's where we come together. They make their kind of decisions of like, okay, this is our plan for the next X number of years. Various ministries need to end up doing XYZ actions, and they get an agreement with those ministries, and that's where like they divide. Okay, so at the end of the day, at a national level, we need to do these things in total. This is how it's split up in terms of actions for the various ministries. There's a discussion, there's a coordination, and once that is done, then the implementation happens within those ministries by themselves. They have the freedom to do that. So that's kind of like how in Singapore this issue is taken at a national level. It's taken as something that, you know, warrants being placed and parked under the Prime Minister's office. So that's how important we feel this issue is. Yeah. So that's kind
Yes,
of
I
like
think yeah, I think climate is not only seen as a multifaceted issue, it is also a multi-ministry issue, right?
exactly, exactly.
So yeah, I think that's because you have like shared with us how is the complexity between ministries and
Hmm.
how the climate issues is like yeah relevant with also most of the ministries. Then I think that is how the concern or the awareness of international cooperation is growing within so that they can translate it that international cooperation is a big thing to do if
Yep.
they want if or if the government want to do or want to achieve to reduce their carbon emissions. And how do the Singapore government uncover potential collaboration between like maybe between countries or at least in ASEAN? Are there any tools that they are utilizing right now?
Okay, yes, yes. So, right now at the national level, we already have a lot of kind of like traditional tools that are used in other countries, tools like Times, Osmosis, and so on and so forth, and Stevens. So, these are creating national level models, but at the same time, to really start pushing towards international collaboration, we are also building, and the government is funding other tools. So one specific tool that they've recently funded, that I'm co-building with the climate analytics, is called the Global Mitigation Potential Atlas. So this is a tool that 2 years ago we launched phase one of it. This was funded by the Singaporean government and the Netherlands government, alongside a few other what do you call it? Commercial players. They're philanthropic arms of these players. So this is a tool that helps to show how much emissions you can reduce in each country, and if countries work together, you can reduce costs and emissions even more. And with this, you can get countries onto the discussion table and be like, hey guys, you can save costs, you can save emissions. Let's work together. So that's kind of like one of the huge tools that the government is actually pushing for. And the key to this is for us to really us as Singapore and the government of Singapore to really push for international collaboration, what the Singaporean government has to do is to not just convince the internal ministries that, hey, this is what we need to do, this makes sense compared to our domestic measures, but also to tell the other countries that we are going to be collaborating with that there is a win-win. There's enough on the pot that system-wide we will save emissions and money. There's enough to go around, and therefore we can have win-win scenarios. So, for example, for Singapore, we will eventually be buying a lot of electricity, buying a lot of green energy because Singapore does not actually have that much. It's alternative energy disadvantage. So, in some sense, Singapore is going to be a buyer. But this means that there's an opportunity for a lot of ASEAN member states to sell to use that are more endowed with renewable energy, right? To sell some of their green energy to Singapore, and this can create a lot of potential benefits and cross benefits, like creation of jobs and so on and so forth as well, right? So the GMPA tool is something that is independent. The Singapore government feels that they want to be involved with funding this alongside other governments, and they want to use it in a transparent way that the data is something that is trustable. So therefore, the results are something where they want to also show the other countries that, hey, look, there is benefit to you. We're not just saying it, right? So they want to say that this is independently verified, that this data, there is a benefit to you as well. And there's enough of us for us to there's enough benefits to go around. So let's work together. So this is one of the huge tools that they've been using to both convince internally as well as externally to push towards international collaboration.
Yes, that's interesting how you explain that GMPA could show like the potential benefits and also the risk based on
Yeah,
like several considerations. Now, could you like show us the overview of the tools a bit, just a bit of it, so that the audience could like know and can practically try the tools even if they just wanted to know about it?
of course, of course. All right, so let me share my screen. So firstly, the GMPA tool is in fact free to use. It's publicly available. It's free to use. So if you want to go to mitigationatlas.org, you can go and play around with it. Uh, so the data we have used is open source and trustable. If you have any more questions about it, you can also just like email me and ask me. So okay, so when you come in, one of the first things we see is that there's a map of the world that shows, this is a heat map that shows how much emissions you can reduce at different price points in each country. So you can play around and see, at different price point, how much emissions you can reduce. And if you click a specific country, let's say we click Malaysia or Indonesia, then what we see is a detailed breakdown at different price levels, how much you can reduce, and also this thing called the dynamic Pareto abatement cost curve. So this is a trade-off between costs and emissions. So if we zoom in, if you click dynamic Pareto abatement cost curve, let me zoom into this. So on the y-axis, you have costs. And on the x-axis, you have emissions. So if you were to build a system that meets all of our energy needs, there's going to be a trade-off. There's going to be a trade-off between costs and emissions. If we try to reduce emissions, costs will go up. If we try to reduce costs, emissions will go up. So let's say, for example, we don't care about the climate. We just want to have the lowest costs. Emissions can be really high. This is how much it's going to cost us, right? And if you look at the slice, these are different actions or technologies that need to be invested in that make up the total cost. And that's given in a bar chart. So what users can then say, hey, what if I want to reduce emissions? What I want my emissions to be around 50% of this? Then the cost will be going up by a few percent. The mix of technologies are different. So previously you have to use this technology purple, which is more fossil fuels, but afterwards you have to use more, let's say, onshore wind, right? So this is where we can see like, hey, if you want to try to reduce emissions, costs start to go up, or you can say, I'm willing to put in this much money in total. What's the lowest amount of emissions that I can have? And again, what are the technologies that we need? Certain technologies only start getting used early on. Certain technologies are only necessary near the end when you start to getting to 0% emissions. So, for example, batteries, ammonia storage, those are the kind of technologies that we only really start needing once you get close to net zero. Then you can see dynamically, the trade-off between cost and emissions. And so this is where step number one. Step number two is, okay, now we know what countries can do by themselves. Let's try to uh, see what will happen if, um let's say, a country like Singapore. What about Singapore? So in Singapore, what we see is that there's a gap. Using just domestic measures, we can't actually get to net zero. Because, like I said previously, if you cover the whole country with solar panels, 5 to 10% of our emissions, that's all we can do. So for Singapore, what we can say is, what if we collaborate? What if we collaborate with, let's say, Indonesia and see our benefits? And you can see that at various price levels, the emissions that we can reduce in autarky, working by ourselves, versus in collaboration increases. And you see that this DPAC curve, it moves from the bottom to the bottom and to the left. To the bottom means for the same emissions, we can build new strategies are unlocked that can reduce cost. meeting the same emissions. On to the left means for the same cost, we can build a system with lower emissions. And that mitigation gap that you see, that gets filled. And again, you can go down to the details and see what needs to be done in each country. So let's say, for example, for a certain amount of emissions reductions, what needs to be done in Indonesia, what needs to be done in Singapore, and also what needs to be done in between Singapore and Indonesia. For example, if you're building electricity lines, or is there going to be a trade of ammonia or hydrogen? So this is what the recommendations come. And you can see what other technologies required with collaboration or let's say without collaboration and see which are no regret options, which are different. You can see collaborations, let's say not just with Singapore and Indonesia, but with multiple countries, two countries, three countries, and you can do that in a dynamic way. So that's kind of
Mhm.
like just a quick overview of the tool, and you can start to see what we're talking about, right?
Yes, yes, of course. Actually, for your information, for the audience information, I also participated in one of ARNECC's trainings programs on GMPA last February, and I think based on my experience, it is a very simple way to operate the tools, but you really get like an overview of the potential collaborations in a more comprehensive way. So it is also providing the total cost and also potential like pathways on how to collaborate with not only two countries but beyond two countries, right, Anik?
Exactly, exactly.
Yeah, so I think this is like so a helpful tool to create a science-based policy target for the government. And
Mm,
before I move to the next questions, maybe if someone would like to ask the question, you can type your question right on the box below, the Q&A box, and we will answer your question after this discussion session. So Anik, you just show us like the result of how GMPA translated our scenarios as a result. And then what's next? How does the Singaporean government translate this result into the policy? And also putting note that it requires further consideration from other stakeholders, for example, like industries, communities,
yep.
and maybe the government itself.
Okay, okay. So I guess maybe firstly let's see where GMPA is positioned in the set of like various tools and policy tools and modeling tools that are out there. There are a lot of high level policy tools in a sense of like how should we think about the problem and stuff, but that narrows down to hundreds and thousands of options, potential options of how we can collaborate, right? And then when you on the other end of the spectrum, we have very detailed modeling tools that will tell you like given one set of combinations, what should we be doing to assess that? But given international collaboration, there's so many different options. We can't go down to deep modeling. So we need some way to narrow down from those hundreds of thousands of options down to maybe a handful that we can then take to the next stage with our detailed modeling. So that's where we really want to get. We want to overcome this bridge, that barrier, right? Where this gap where we want to take from infinite possibilities to a handful of potential possibilities, and then other tools come in that take over. So that's kind of like where GMPA comes in. In terms of actual implementation, the Singapore government is doing it in two ways. Number one is externally, the government has shared data so that the information about Singapore that is up there is something that is publicly available, but is also agreed upon and trusted by the government. So the government has said, yes, this is data that we are happy with. Like this is the data we're most happy with that is publicly available. Right? So that's one thing. So when other countries see this data, when they want to come and talk to Singapore, they know that this is a good starting point to talk to. It's not something that's out of the blue, right? So there will be very good discussions and negotiations. So it's a good starting point. So that's number one. Number two is for the internal planning, there are certain data that the Singaporean government may not want to share, right? And maybe some of the values that are publicly available, the Singaporean government might have a slightly different internal value. Like the public value might be a good order of magnitude, but the final details is something that the Singapore government wants to keep itself. So that's where the Singapore government has also taken a private version of the tool, so a private copy of GMPA, and modified it, and it's now using for its internal processes. So those results the GMPA consortium doesn't see, but we have passed them the open source data and models, and the government has actually then taken it and modified it. They're also actually in trying to see how they can connect the GMPA tool with their internal tools. So they have the national level modeling tools in using Times and Stevens. So they're trying to see how the GMPA tool can be used to set some boundary conditions at an international level, and then those get translated to the national level, and then those national level targets are set. So they're also using that private version of GMPA to do that policy planning. So this is kind of like two ways that the government is using. One internally to do detailed modeling, but also two externally, they've given the data that they are happy with, that they are comfortable with to be represented. They feel that is representative of them, and they are using GMP as a tool to also show their other stakeholders that, hey, look, there is a win-win. Let's take it to the next step. So that's kind of like how the government is using it.
Yes, and I think it's interesting how you just pointed out the strength of the GMPA tools itself, because not only that you stressed about the how GMPA captured the potential collaboration, but also you mentioned about how GMPA could be customized based on the user's necessity, so that it
Correct.
would fit more on their research or on their further objectives. So it would be more, how to say, it could be used by broader audience or broader
Exactly.
researcher around the world. Wow,
Mm.
that's so great, Annie. That's a great idea and great tool. Thank you very much for creating this tool.
Thank you, thank you.
So yeah, if we already talk about the government sides, now I
Mhm.
want to hear like the executors respond. For example, how does the government communicate this kind of like initiative to the industries or the Singaporean community so that
Mm.
they will gradually accept or will follow the regulation as well,
Yep.
because it consists of like a lot of reporting, right? So
Yep.
how do you communicate with each other?
Okay, okay. So I guess like a lot of this and the GMPA tool is mainly about the national and international level. So as a country, let's say the Singaporean government has said that we want to reduce this much. As a world at the United Nations, the world has come together and we are saying that we want to reduce emissions, maybe get to 1.5 C, etc. But the next layer down is all these emissions are made up of various organizations that are, burning fossil fuels or maybe producing electricity from renewables. And they're the ones that are taking action that make up the countries. And a lot of these organizations don't squarely fit into a country. Some of them are cross country, right? Like they have some operations in one country, some operations in the others. So that's kind of like a different way of accounting, two different accounting systems. There's the national level and then there's the corporate level, right? So when the government wants to translate their actions or their targets down to the corporations, what it looks like is, for example, carbon tax,
Mhm.
right? So in Singapore, there's a carbon tax that's increasing as well over the years. So and there's projections. They've put those numbers out there. So that's where companies are being told, oh, we need to start reducing our emissions because it's going to cost more and more to increase those emissions, right? So those are most carbon taxes in Singapore are localized. So the carbon tax in Singapore is localized. So if you're burning in Singapore, that's where it matters. So that aligns really well the national level accounting. But at the same time, a lot of emissions for a company or even a country is actually across the supply chain. So that's where the governments are also saying, hey, look, we don't just want you to report and reduce emissions, but actually there's a whole framework of reporting emissions based on corporations. It's called Scope 1, 2, 3 and emissions reporting. So Scope 1 is kind of like what the company emits by itself. Scope 2 and 3 are what are happening across the supply chain. So companies in Singapore are being asked to report those emissions. So right now, all listed companies in Singapore need to report their Scope 3 emissions by 2026, 2027. And these regulations are slowly coming down to smaller and smaller companies. So it's getting stricter and stricter. So that means that the government is basically saying, hey, look, number one, I'm going to start taxing you. So it's going to be more expensive to reduce to continue emitting. So that's one way incentive, so-called stake to reduce those emissions. Number two is we need to start asking you to account for those emissions. There are corporate level accounting standards called Scope 1, 2, 3. So go for those, and those regulations are coming down. And the point of that is once they come down, then companies will be asked, go and reduce those numbers, right? Go and reduce the numbers for your emissions. Go and reduce the numbers for your supply chain. That's the whole point of the accounting. Step one is accounting. Step two will be reduction. And number three, in Europe, CBAM. So that's where,
Yes.
yeah, so that's the next, the product level comes in, the third level of accounting, right? So if you're selling a product, you're buying a product to produce everything across the whole supply chain, what are the emissions, right? So if you want to export something to the EU, you have to pay the carbon tax for all the emissions produce outside to produce that thing before all the embedded emissions. So again, so those regulations are coming in to report those numbers, and using CBAM, that's kind of taxing it. So you're indirectly asking people to reduce those numbers. In some countries, there are also a third level where organizations are actually being told your actual emissions numbers need to go down by X amount, or maybe some kind of targets for them or some kind of budgets for them. In Singapore, the government is actually doing it more of like carbon tax, but that doesn't mean that they may not also start including these other methods. So, for example, like scope one, two, three, once they start having emissions, then the targets might start coming as well, right? So those are the kind of like tools that exist at the corporate level, and the policy regulations that the Singaporean government and other governments are using to implement that national international level down to the corporate level.
So this just popped out my mind actually. So can we actually put scenarios on the GMPA tools where all ASEAN member states, these 11 states, for example, are using carbon tax regulations and see the potential behind it?
Okay, so let's see. So right now, we can't do all 11 countries yet. We can do
Mhm.
4 countries at a time, but that's something that we can enhance. We're enhancing the tool, so maybe at some point we can get to that level as well. In terms of carbon taxes, um, right now, the way the visualization is done, it's carbon budgets. So if countries have set specific targets, so in this year we want this much emissions, in this year we want this much emissions, so combined we have this much target, right? So for that, then then what's the least cost strategy? So that's how we are modeling things in GMPA. Like we have set some targets, we know that we want to what we want to achieve, right? So that's step number one. So we know we want to reduce emissions. And number two is, okay, so how much is going to cost by ourselves to do that? If our individual targets are met by ourselves, or if we combine the target, now we have a unified ASEAN target, right? So now if you have a unified ASEAN target, how much is it going to cost ASEAN? Actually, we can optimize and reprioritize so we can be more efficient with it. And that's where, like, when you have that savings, those savings can then be spread and split across. Carbon taxes are one way of implementing that. That's kind of like the next step. So once we know that this is what we want to do, carbon tax is kind of like uh, if you want to encourage a specific technology, how do we encourage it? Oh, we set the carbon tax to this level. So if we know that this is going to be the Pareto-Bateman cost curves, that trade-off curve, that trade-off, the gradient of that trade-off curve actually tells you what's the carbon tax you wanna set. The short answer. Um, it doesn't directly tell you what do we do with different carbon tax. It actually tells you if you want to reduce emissions, what should you do? And if you want to calculate the carbon tax, you can back calculate it. And you can say, this is what the carbon tax should be if you want to reduce it by this much. And actually, maybe now that I think about it, actually just came to me, which is we can even see if you were to work by ourselves, what is the carbon tax we need to set? And if we
Oh,
work as ASEAN, then what's the carbon tax we have to set? Because it'll be quite
oh,
different, right?
interesting.
And actually, if we work together as ASEAN, because it's going to be more efficient and so on and so forth, the carbon tax we need to set is going to be much lower.
Yeah,
So
that's interesting. Given, I mean, the
that's
situation, yeah, the situation is in ASEAN is like some countries are trying to set up their carbon regulation as well. And I think because you just explained the potential, like how much a tax should be applied by ASEAN as a region
mm,
to collaborate with each other from that could be gained from the GMP. I think yeah, it's so
yeah,
potential how yeah, it's a very potential how GMPA could provide the initial findings on how ASEAN countries could cooperate with each other. Yes,
exactly.
right.
Yeah,
That's
yeah.
how I think that's how the Singapore translate the to enhance international cooperation on their NDC. So, Anik, I think we have a lot of questions here.
Okay, okay.
So, can we start answering it?
Sure, sure, sure.
Okay.
Yeah, let's start answering.
So, yeah, so the first question is coming from Shankar Karki.
Hmm.
And he asked about Dr. Anik said data is open source and tool is
Um,
government research funded. Is the tool also open source?
okay. So, the model, the data itself is from open so are open source. So if you want the data, you can get them, and we have the links to all the data, so we can actually. Most of them are taken from international databases like IEA, IEA, CCG, and so on and so forth, Irina. So you can take it from them. Some other we then talked to a few countries, for example, Singapore, where we passed the data to them, and we said, is this the most appropriate data? Sometimes it is, sometimes it's not, and then they tell us which is the more appropriate number to use. So some of those are further validated as well. So again, if users want to get the data, they can just send me an email, and then we will pass you that data. In terms of models, the backend models, the optimization models that are used, that's using the Stevens open source tool. So again, free to use, and actually there's even a GMPA branch of that tool. So if you just literally go to that GMPA branch, it's the code is in Python, download it, and you can run it straight away. Like all of the data is there, all of the modeling is there. You can run those things by yourselves. You can see the exact results that are being on there in terms of CSV files. You can the CSV file results will come out. You can see all of the data that's on the platform, both the inputs and the outputs and the modeling data. So yeah, all of that is open source. If you need more details of how to find it, just send us an email.
Great. So yes, actually the tool is open source,
Hmm.
and yes, you can reach Dr. Anik through email if you want to know more about the GMPA tools. And next questions we got from Aldila, our friends Aldila.
I'll do that.
How receptive have the governments and industry stakeholders been to engaging with the results of GMPA? What
Mhm.
incentives or barriers have you encountered?
Okay, okay. So yeah, I have to be completely honest with this. It's not been a smooth journey. That's always going to be ups and downs, right? So I guess like one barrier there has been is data sensitivity. So countries and even industry and stuff are like, oh, do we want to share this data? And one of the things we, and the usual story about information is that information is power. As long as you keep information, you have the power, right? If you give it away, you lose the power. But GMPA is one of those situations where you flip it around. You flip that story around. You say that, hey, actually, if you give information out, that's where you really have power. Because that's where you can show to and prove to the other person that there is a benefit to you. Don't just trust me. This is a transparent and trustable number. And that's where you move forward. If you only use your own numbers and you don't share this information, that's when you don't have the power. So that's where we had to like discuss with them and show them with the tool that, hey, look, if that number was there, you can see what the benefit is. So we actually started off by having um, publicly use data. We got the numbers up. We put it into the calculations and the models, and we got some results out. And when we had that ASEAN conference, Indira, like, so that's that's where we actually got the 9 out of 10 ASEAN member states. Like we got representative from all of them, right? So we got them to use it, and that's when they started saying, "Hey, but actually, I really like these results. I could use this for this kind of narrative to push this to have these kind of discussions in that potential collaboration discussion." And they said, but the data, the numbers, this seem a bit off. Like I want to use this number. I like using this number. Why have you used this one? And we said, okay, we have used the number because of this. But if you have a number that you're more comfortable and that's more representative, please pass it to us. So when they see the value of it, that's when they started moving and they're like, okay, yeah, we're happy to collaborate. And that's where like, we're now talking, right, in DRL that to see how we can use the ASEAN like process to get more of the data. So that's kind of like how we navigated this space of like if you have the tool but no data, what are you going to do? If you have the data but no tool, what are you going to do? So we use whatever data we have, we show the value, and then we can convince them that, hey, look, some information is better that it's out, right? And you don't have to give all of the information. Additional details can be kept inside. So it's similar to what the Singaporean government is doing. And then if you use a private version of that tool, you can do further analysis. So yeah.
Yes, yeah, I think Aldila I think Aldila's give Anik such a detail and also like straightforward questions
Oh my.
Mainly on data collection because at the Asset Center for Energy also facing like the similar challenges about data where we also compile like the ASEAN member states data on energy and translate it into and project it and have projection on it as specifically on the energy sector. So moving on to the next question. So I think someone having like a lot of questions here, but let's just
Um,
answer one of them.
yeah.
And I will ask you to choose which
Okay, let
one
me.
of the questions would you like to answer.
Um, okay, let's see. Mention pathway. Um, so let maybe question number two might be interesting, right?
Mhm.
So out of the three kind of like channels, which one will deliver the fastest, most transformative results for Singapore? Um, okay, so if it's about fast and transformative, the physical one will take the longest. So I think that's gonna be like unfortunately the bottom. That's going to be the basis and the long-term strategy, where at the end of the day, once everyone gets to zero, we need to get to zero. So, Singaporean government and Singapore, has to think about that in the long term. But in terms of shorter term, that's where the indirect is actually going to be Singapore's biggest bet. So using Article 6, because 10 years is not a long time, and if building infrastructure is already very, very long, but just talking about building that infrastructure is also, a long discussion. And it's not just going to be between Singapore and Indonesia. Most of the time, it will be multi-country. So there's a lot of discussions and collaborations before something like that happens. So the planning stage and eventual execution stage for physical things, that's not going to be the most transformative one. The most transformative is actually going to be indirect collaboration. So Article 6. So we already have, the Singapore government has already made MOUs and implementation agreements with more than a dozen countries around the world. So that's the most aggressive thing that they are doing. And that's where, the Singapore government is going to basically put in money to make sure that other countries do emissions reductions that would not have happened otherwise. So in the short term, by 2035, those reductions would not have occurred because they're too expensive to happen, or they're well beyond the targets of that country, right? So that's where it's going to be the most transformative and fastest. The financial one is some kind of like a backbone, but the phys the like the fastest and real thing that really happens is going to be the indirect things. So I think that's going to be like the fastest and indirect ones.
Yes, I think it is also maybe relevant to the pledges that the countries committed with on COP, where I think Singapore also, yeah, also made some pledges on COP, and I think, well, while many people seen the pledges as maybe not going somewhere, but I think the country might seen it as the initial step to move forward like a further scheme of low carbon emissions pathways or other regulations as well. Because when you don't have the consensus of agreement itself, you cannot start anything with it.
Exactly, exactly.
So yeah, so I think we just need to see the progress. I think not
Hmm.
next year, but maybe in a longer term of that of the climate action and also the implementation of the regulation, so that it would be more how to say impactful to see and to assess rather
Yep.
than like directly seeing it like 1 year ahead. Because
Yep.
climate is a very huge and complex issues that you cannot even see the like significant progress within a year. So
Hmm.
we need to
Hmm.
be patient.
Yeah, we need to have patience. Yeah.
Yeah. So moving to the next question, Anik. I'm just curious, how do the model define collaboration
Um,
here? Does that mean countries that collaboration means that there's a trade in energy commodities? What type of commodities that is traded here? And is there any other form of collaboration that is modeled here other than the energy commodity trade?
Yep, yep. Okay. So this is where there's direct and indirect collaboration. So direct collaboration is kind of like the physical trade of energy. So that's electricity, hydrogen, or ammonia. So that's direct collaboration. Indirect collaboration is prioritization. So that's where, let's say, combine Singapore, Indonesia by a specific year, let's say 2035 or 2050, wants to reduce their emissions, or they want their combined emissions to be X amount. So instead of reducing the emissions in Singapore, the emissions are reduced in Indonesia. So that's the indirect collaboration route. So both of them are modeled um, in GMPA, and you can see like if you model it in autarky, that collaboration doesn't happen. In collaboration, that those kind of direct international direct collaborations do happen.
Okay, so I hope it's answered the questions here, and let us move to the next question from Akwika Hermawan. And between governments and business, who do you think can make the biggest
Ooh.
difference? In which sectors specifically do you think to turn the GMPA from data into real action? So it's
Oh
a black
wow.
and white question.
Okay,
So
okay.
I think, what's your take on this?
Governments or businesses? Okay, okay. So, in all seriousness, the governments need to be the ones that are pushing the businesses, and the businesses are going to be the ones that actually takes the real action. I think that's the way I'm seeing it. So the governments are now understanding the will of the people, right? So each government understands that the people care about these things. We care about the environment, right? We care about like flooding happening and our food crops. It's like so we care about these kind of things, right? And that's why we're asking the government to do something for us, and then that's the government's responsibility to make that happen. Means that regulate various types of regulations are going to come down, and it's the businesses that are actually going to have to take that action, right? Because their actions are the ones that are creating the emissions, right? So in terms of like uh, who's going to be making the biggest difference, it has to it's not one or the other. Like governments need to once they have the plan, they need to take the courage to actually find ways to get businesses to internalize the will of the people, the requirements of the people, whether it's through carbon tax, whether it's through budgets and so on and so forth, whether it's through reporting, uh, mandatory reductions, mandatory reporting. So those are the kind of like tools that the governments need to ask businesses to do. And then businesses can then say, okay, this is now um, a different landscape. They've changed the game. Now we still need to play. And they just continue on doing what they do as businesses. They see the new value, they see the new constraints, and they still continue on making money. But it's just that the landscape in which they make money changes. And this is actually a new opportunity for them. So they need to think about this as like the world is changing. Now there's a new business opportunity. Let's start making money in this new changing landscape. So that's how like businesses will start coming in, and they should be viewing this thing.
Yes, and I think you highlighted how government and businesses complement each other in terms of like preparing and also tailoring action towards
Yes, yes.
this so-called the low carbon future of
Mm,
not only ASEAN but also the global low carbon
yeah.
future. And yes, I think it's a good take from you to explain how important is like each sector to be considered
Mm.
within the pathway or the implementation plans.
Okay, okay, yeah, the sector, I forgot about the sector part. I think that in terms of sectors, in GMPA, we currently have the power and high temperature heating in industry sectors. We are expanding it to cover other sectors up to 80% of emissions in phase three. But in terms of where is it going to be most useful? Energy intensive sectors. I think that's one of the things where GMPA is most useful because you see a lot of trade-offs between the various technologies that you could use, a lot of interdependencies. So that's where GMPA really will shine. And that's where you see the interdependencies between sectors. You see the interdependencies between countries. Um, there are other sectors, like, for example, land use and stuff. Those are sufficiently decoupled, where you can view them as a separate thing. So they will still going to be on GMPA eventually, but they will be less directly. The data will be less directly useful. Like some of that data is already there, but the real data and the results and the analysis that will be useful that comes out of GMPA is going to be the interdependent data. So that's going to be like technology data, anything to do with manufacturing industry, energy related activities. So if companies have a lot of energy heavy activities, that's the first sectors that are going to benefit from GMPA the most.
So talking back about GNPA itself, what is the like three top features from GMPA tools that is that makes them uh, how to say that is that no other open source tool has on it.
Ooh, three features that no other tool has. So I guess number one is the ease of use, like the balance between the ease of use and the results that I get there. So it's interactive, easy to use. You don't need to be like an energy expert to play around with it. So that's something where most tools right now are too technical. You need to be an energy modeler, you need to know Python and so on and so forth to be able to use them, right? Um, and so that's number one. Number two is that we are really focusing on international collaboration. So really drilling down and we're saying that, look, without collaboration, with collaboration. This is the benefit. So really, like we're really pushing for that. Whereas like a lot of other tools, they're very they're usually more locally focused, like within the country or within a sector. They're looking at it from a kind of like a more focused view. But for us, we're looking at it from a bigger view. We're prioritizing because CO2 does not see boundaries, right? So that's number two. And finally, like the thing that we do is we're also showing a trade-off analysis. We're saying like, we we understand that uh climate change there's going to be trade-offs. We it will cost us some money. There's benefits that are non-monetary that are, to the environment, human health. But in terms of money, there is a trade-off, right? So maybe the targets that we set need to be sustainable as well, right? So they need to be realistic targets that we can actually achieve. So is our target set that is too ambitious? Can we set a more realistic target? Maybe if we set more realistic targets, we actually can get buy-in and we can move. Maybe for some other countries, they are too afraid that the targets have been set too high. But in fact, it's not too high. We can be more ambitious, and there's actually not really that much of a difference in cost. So GMPA shows that trade-off between cost and emissions, so that we can set better targets. So we can set better targets. We can see what's the optimized way to meet those targets, and put it in a way that policymaker, like even simple people can use. So that's kind of like, you set the targets easy by showing the trade-offs. Number two, you optimize, you tell you these cost way and the before and after collaboration. And finally, put it in a way that is dynamic, easy to use. So these are three things that other tools don't really have.
Yes, yes. And I also I have tried like several modeling tools that provided online available online. They don't really serve their potential collaboration within the countries. They only serve
Mm,
like national data or how is the national project or progress without considering potential collaboration within countries. So yeah, I guess JMPA is a pioneer to like introduce how important is collaboration between not only in national in two countries, but also maybe regionally and globally in the
yep.
future. So
Yep.
I think we have last question here. Given that many ASEAN countries still rely heavily on fossil fuels for energy
Mm.
security, do you think Singapore's NDC could realistically influence regional transition pathways, or will national interest remain the main barrier to a unified climate?
Okay. So, I guess one thing is that fossil fuels hide something. They hide the fact that they're still a commodity and there's still trade. So, for example, even in Singapore, we don't produce those like fossil fuels. We purchase them, right? So so when it comes to national security, we need to also understand that even fossil fuels are not that secure. And even when you look at recent events happening around the world with Ukraine and so on and so forth, like fossil fuel prices just skyrocketed, right? And when you look at the fossil fuel prices, because they're on the market, oil prices can suddenly go up and down because countries might be dumping or like restricting oil, right? So the commodity market for fossil fuels is actually very, very volatile. And that is leading to a lot of really huge increases in volatile costs of electricity, of energy for consumers, for everyday people, as well as businesses. So to say that that's, just national security, like if you have fossil fuels, we have national security, that's not true. That's that's number one. Like you can't say that if you have fossil fuels, you have national security. So that's something that we have to accept and realize ourselves. You know, just because it's been happening doesn't mean that's actually the most secure. Um, so number two is that when it comes to um, what do you call it? Trade of energy, of electricity. So there's ups and downs. The upside is that the trade of electricity, if the electricity is produced from renewables that are very stable, in a sense that once you put them on, you have actually like you've made a long-term investment. In terms of the costs, those things don't the cost of the panels, they've already been paid for. They don't change. It's actually a different kind of market. So fundamentally, it's actually stable in that sense. So that's one thing to understand. And number two, what you can say is that, oh, you're purchasing from one country, okay, you become less stable. But if you connect multiple countries together, suddenly no one country actually has a lot of power. And in fact, when you connect multiple countries, the system becomes more stable. So actually, what the GMPH tool shows is what is the trade-off between what's the techno-economics of it? The geopolitics we can think about ourselves. The policymakers know the geopolitics. We don't talk about that, but we tell them that, hey, if you can put that geopolitics aside, or you can somehow change the geopolitics instead of bilateral, multilateral, actually that's even more stable than even individual, then the cost can also go down. So then you can say, is it worth having, let's say, an additional country being involved in this collaboration? If you bring them in, maybe there's some geopolitical implications. Maybe it's not that easy to deal with them, but we can save X amount of money. Actually, it's worth it. Or they can realize that actually, even if we can save, $5 billion or whatever amount of money, dealing with the additional geopolitics may not be worth it, and then they can decide not to. So the GMPA tool actually doesn't quantify the geopolitics, it quantifies the techno-economics. And then the policymakers can play around in an interactive way and weigh the difference. Is it worth it? Is it not worth it?
Yes, and what you just said right now, I think it's just show how the GMPA fulfilling the gap,
Yeah.
especially within the policymakers on how they should be more considerate to tailor and also to create more climate friendly policy in the near future. So I think
Mhm.
one closing question from me as someone who valued collaboration, Anik. Could you share your overview regarding ASEAN's climate collaboration landscape in the future? What are three things that need to be prioritized for ASEAN to accelerate their climate action?
Oh, okay. So I guess like Nation for me, um, let's see. Maybe I might go back to the three major things that the Singaporean government is kind of also pushing for, right? Like, um, number one, physical collaboration. Like we as ASEAN need to start thinking about how we can share our resources. You know,
Mhm.
more trade of sustainable renewable energy so that we can create more jobs and win-win scenarios and we can really combat climate change. Number two is also in terms of um, Article 6 implementation. So that's something that we can also start to think about. So can we help other countries in the short term do more emissions reductions that would not have occurred otherwise? And number three, the finance or the flow of finance. We need to start thinking about, okay, let's look at ASEAN as a region. There are countries that have a lot more financial resources. Then there are countries that have the ability to take action that need those resources, and vice versa. And there are countries that need the demand for the resources that they get produced. So there's a whole ecosystem there. So in terms of finance, we need to have more flow of finance across the ASEAN region, right? So that's the third thing we need. So we need physical flow of energy. We need like flow of emissions or carbon credits, and we also need the flow of money. Like all these three need to happen within ASEAN. So and that's going to create a lot of benefits, not just combating climate change, but actually co-benefits like creation of jobs and more stability across the region and stuff.
Well, thank you very much, Shani, for your perspectives. I think you brought the value within yourself and then translated it into like the policy implementation as well. And it's super great to hear that. So if I could take some summary and some highlights from our discussions today. So in the beginning, we just start to explore about to introduce the Singapore's 3.0 NDC submission, where you already shown the gradual ambitions of Singaporean government to combat or to tackle climate change. And
Mhm.
then you also highlighted how the Singaporean government is also working behind the stage by establishing the specialist bodies, the interministerial body, to connect all the ministries and raising the awareness that climate change is not how to say is a multi-ministry issue. Not only one institutions should be included in that case. And you also introduced us the GMPA, the Global Mitigation Potential Atlas, that is fulfilling the gap between the policymakers so that they
Mhm.
could tailor the initial plan for their initial policy making process in the climate perspective as well, and how you view the ASEAN as a region that requires urgent need to collaborate with each other and fulfilling each other's gaps so that we as a region could accelerate together to achieve the low carbon future. Well, thank you very much, Anik, for your time and
Thank you, Indira.
your valued sharing in this time. So I hope to see you in the next future or maybe in the next collaboration with the ASEAN Center for Energy.
Of course, thank you so much, Indira, for inviting me once again. And yes, I'm definitely looking forward to more collaborations with the ASEAN Center for Energy, meeting up with you as well. Like, it'd be nice.
Okay, great. So I will give the stage back to Tanya.
All right, thank you very much, Ms. Indira and Dr. Anik Ahsan, for the exciting discussion and valuable insights throughout the session. Thank you also to our audiences for your interesting questions. But before we conclude, I would like to invite both of you to a brief photo session. To Dr. Anik and Ms. Indira, please be ready and give your biggest smile to the camera. Okay, I will lead the countdown. Three, two, one. One more time, please. Three, two, one. Okay, thank you, everyone. To our speaker, Dr. Anik Ahsan, I would like to thank you for sharing your insights on Singapore's climate ambitions towards NDCs, opportunities for international climate collaboration, such as physical trade of green energy, trade of carbon emissions, and green finance, and how technology like the Global Mitigation Potential Atlas can bridge data-driven decision-making and cross-border collaboration to accelerate energy transition and climate resilience in ASEAN. So we have finally approached the end of today's ARNECC Live podcast. Thank you everyone for tuning in and for your insightful questions. We hope that this discussion can provide new insights for everyone. Stay tuned to our social media, newsletter, and website for more information on ARNECC and all things around the energy and climate nexus in ASEAN. I'm Natanya Zelia. Enjoy the rest of your afternoon, and we hope to see you next month at our ARNECC webinars. Thank you, everyone.